Okay, here is a very simple argument. My car broke down yesterday, and I need a car to get to work. Therefore, I will have to buy a new car. Even though this is a very simple argument, you'll see as we go to the next slides that it has the three main components that all arguments have. Okay, these are the three components: the conclusion, the premise or premises, and the assumption or assumptions. The conclusion is basically what the author or writer of the argument is saying should happen. We also sometimes call that the thesis. So it's the conclusion or the recommendation for action. The premises are the things that support the conclusion. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The assumptions are unstated conditions that must be true in order for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, if we look at our original argument again, we can see that it's labeled in premise-conclusion format. The conclusion of this argument, which is my recommendation for action, is that I need to buy a new car. I'm basing or supporting that conclusion on two different premises. The first premise is that my car broke down, and the second premise is that I need a car to get to work. Now you might be wondering where the assumptions are, because we've already labeled the whole argument and there's no assumptions here, and yet we've already talked about the fact that that is the third component of any argument. So we'll talk about that in the next slide. Okay, the assumptions, remember, are unstated. That's why we couldn't see them, because you never see them. They're unstated conditions. In this case, here are some possible assumptions in this argument about my car breaking down. In order for my conclusion to be valid, and remember my conclusion is that I need to buy a new car, all of these assumptions would have to be valid. It would have to be true that my car can't be fixed, I can't get a ride with anyone, it's too far to walk to work, and there is no public transportation. Those are some assumptions in this argument. Okay, for you visual learners out there, let's talk about this diagram for a minute. If we think of this table as an argument, it's a metaphor that works pretty well. Remember that the tabletop, which is the part of the table that you actually use, can be thought of as the conclusion or the thesis. So in this case, the tabletop is the statement that I need to buy a new car. The tabletop is supported by premises. Now, there's only two premises in our argument. The first one is that my car broke down, and the second one is that I need a car to get to work. So those are P1 and P2 that are holding up my tabletop or my conclusion. Now there's something that we don't see when we look at a table, and that's whatever it is that's joining the legs to the tabletop. It's the glue or the nails or the screws or something. Now we can't see that, but if it's not there, or if it's there but it's faulty, for instance the glue doesn't hold or something, if it's not there or if it's there but faulty, what happens? The table collapses. Same thing with an argument. If the assumptions are faulty or not true, then the argument collapses. So in the case of the argument we're talking about here, if any one of those things isn't true, say about public transportation, what if I'm saying, well, I have to buy a new car because there's no public transportation? But what if there really is public transportation? If there really is public transportation, then that means I have a faulty assumption and my argument collapses because my conclusion's no longer valid. I really don't need to buy a new car. So if you don't want this to be your argument, make sure that your conclusion is supported by valid, strong premises, and that the premises and the conclusion are not compromised by faulty assumptions. Sometimes when you have a faulty assumption, we call that a logical fallacy, and that's the next lesson that you'll be moving on to after this is logical fallacy.